Story 1. This story isn't mine, but my father's. My dad is now a retired police officer, having served for 30 years. Throughout his career, he worked in various capacities, including patrol, undercover, as a detective, and as part of a Drug Enforcement Administration task force in the 1990s. About 5 years ago, he transferred to the local sheriff's department and returned to being a regular patrol officer. If you're not familiar with the system in the United States, sheriffs are elected as part of local elections. During the 2018 election, our local sheriff had reached the maximum number of terms he could serve, leading to an open election. The person who ended up winning wasn't someone my dad particularly liked. Before his election, officers were allowed to have a mustache and goatee as long as they were well kept and not too long. However, one of the first changes made by the new sheriff was to the facial hair policy. The new policy stated that facial hair could not be grown past the edge of your lips. However, it omitted an important part of the original policy, the length. So, my dad decided to irritate his new boss by growing a handlebar mustache. It didn't extend past his lips, but it was long enough that he could shape it with beard wax into a handlebar that was quite large. The ends reached his ears when he didn't apply wax. This policy change didn't just affect my dad. Many officers had goatees and were already annoyed with the new boss. About 10 other officers decided to join my dad in growing out handlebar mustaches as well. In a department of 25 officers, nearly half were sporting handlebar mustaches while on patrol. Eventually, the new sheriff decided that the handlebar mustaches were getting out of hand and finally relented, reinstating the old policy. My dad had grown out his mustache for about 2 months, and I watched him cry when he had to shave it off. But at least he got his favorite facial hair allowed again. Story 2. In 2017, I signed a contract with our national mail carrier to deliver parcels for my web shop. The more parcels you send, the better rates you get. The targets were set at 1,000, 2,000, or 5,000 parcels. I opted for the 20 target. At the end of year 1, there would be an evaluation, and they assured me they would be flexible and reasonable because their priority was to help grow my business. I even had that in writing. For any parcel I sent beyond the 20 target, I'd get a 50% refund of the difference between the 2,000 and 5,000 rate, for example. If the 2,000 rate was 3.5 euros per parcel and the 5,000 rate was 3 euros per parcel, they would refund me 0.25 euros for each parcel above my 2,000 goal. On the other hand, for each parcel I fell short of the 20 target by the end of the year, they would charge me double the difference between the 2,000 and 5,000 rate, plus a flat rate penalty fee, so basically €1 per parcel short of the target in the above example, plus the penalty. As the end of year 1 approached, I was 2 weeks away from the deadline, and I had sent 1,850 parcels. Thinking that achieving 92.5% of my target was pretty good for the first year, I called them to discuss the extra charges and penalty. I also wanted to see if I could get the 5,000 rate for the next year since I was expecting strong growth. After all, they claimed it was their priority to help grow my business and that they were flexible and reasonable. To my surprise, they were adamant about me paying the penalty, charging me extra for the 150 parcels, and, on top of that, setting me back to the more expensive 1,000 target rate for the following year. I tried to escalate the matter, but it was to no avail. So much for helping grow my business and being very flexible and reasonable. Then came the malicious compliance. I did the math, and paying the penalty plus the extra charges was nearly double what it would cost me to reach my target if I paid for 150 extra parcels out of my own pocket. I bought 150 bubble wrap envelopes at a low cost, printed 150 stickers with my own address, placed them on each envelope, and drove to the mail office to drop off 150 empty envelopes. The next morning, the mailman arrived at my door with a grin on his face. He's a cool guy and a stash of envelopes, wondering what on earth I was up to. Later that day, I called them to let them know I had reached my target and that I would not renew my contract. I signed with a competitor for about the same price per parcel, without any strings attached, and ended up sending 17,000 parcels in year 2, which amounted to 50,000 euros in business they missed out on. Story 3. Years ago, I was working for a large organization. At first, my boss was very nice and pleasant to work with. I was hired and tasked with taking a very troubled department and bringing it up to standards. My boss was fairly supportive during the initial few months on the job, but then something changed. The department began to perform and improve greatly within the first 6 months, and this was recognized and praised by upper management. This not only made my boss look good, but also improved overall morale within the department, as the team was finally being recognized for their efforts and talents. Around this time, the 6-month mark, I was warned by a few colleagues, both men and women, outside of my department to watch my back because my boss had a reputation for prioritizing her own success over anyone else's. They also warned me that she was known for feeling threatened by any successful men who worked with her, and I am male. She was a strong advocate for the women on her team and regularly promoted and supported them. But it seemed that every man who worked on her team ended up either leaving or getting fired, something I was unaware of when I was hired. Additionally, I was the only male on the team. After looking into this further, I found there was some truth to these claims. Over a 12-year period, more than 8 men on her team either quit or were fired, 6 fired and 2 quit. On the other hand, of the women on her team during the same period, 8 were promoted, 2 quit, 4 were still on the team, and none were fired. Naturally, I was concerned, as I was not only a male but also aware of her reputation for making things difficult for the men on her team. Despite this, I continued to manage the department, focusing on increasing morale and ensuring regular communication with my boss about any potential issues. I also made sure that she received full credit for the department's improvements, often highlighting her role in securing the necessary resources and support. Fast forward to around my 8th month on the job, and I'm in a meeting with my boss. She suddenly begins to scold me for emailing someone in upper management. I explained that I had included the vice president in the email because it concerned the entire area under that vice president's purview. My boss insisted that I should not have done that and proceeded to tell me that I was forbidden from emailing anyone above my pay grade, as that is not my place. She then declared that only she was allowed to email such individuals and that if any communication needed to be sent to them, whether it involved copying them or not, she would send it. I asked if she wanted me to send the emails that needed to go to the vice presidents to her so she could forward them, and she replied, "Yes, send them to me, and I will send them." I also inquired if she preferred that I not call the vice presidents on the phone, to which she responded, "Yes, you are not to call them either." Then she said, "I know you may be used to getting your way because you are a man, but that doesn't mean you can try to take my job." I was completely taken aback by this and decided that I needed to respect her wishes, assuming there was more to the situation than I was aware of. Fine, I thought, we'll do it your way. About a month went by, and during that time, I only needed to email a vice president once. I wrote up the email to the vice president's department, sent it to my boss, and then waited for her to forward it. This email was time-sensitive and involved giving the vice president and their team a heads-up about resources needed for a particular project. The vice president had to be included in this email because the request involved budgetary issues, and only that vice president had the authority to make changes to the budget. Otherwise, I would have communicated directly with the members of the vice president's team to give them the heads-up. So, I sent the email to my boss, asked her to send it within the next 3 days, and then waited. About a week went by, and I happened to run into this particular vice president in the elevator. She asked me about the project and resources, so I assured her that everything was on track. She then inquired about an overrun in one specific area, and I suggested she ask my boss for the details. The vice president asked me to send her an email regarding the overrun, and I responded, "Sure, I will make that happen." Afterward, I followed up with my boss, letting her know about the conversation with the vice president in the elevator, and she exploded with anger. She started yelling and telling me that I was not to talk to that vice president or any other vice president about the project. I explained that I understood her instructions but felt it would have been rude not to acknowledge the vice president's questions, given that we were stuck in the elevator together and I hadn't sought out the conversation. My boss then informed me that she would have to write me up for insubordination and for not honoring her request to avoid emailing, calling, or talking to vice presidents. I was floored, but there was nothing I could do. As I was leaving her office, she told me, "I made a mistake in hiring you. I thought you were different, but you're just as entitled as all the other men I've hired." Things were going downhill fast. Should I go to human resources and have them deal with this? No, that wouldn't solve anything, especially with a boss who had been with the company for about 10 years. Human resources generally doesn't care much about employees and only focuses on managing risk and protecting the company. They wouldn't do anything for me, so I didn't report the incident. I seriously considered filing a complaint about my boss's comments, but when I had the meeting where I had to sign my write-up, I decided against it. The human resources officer had to review the write-up before I signed it, and since the write-up was based on a nonsensical policy that my boss had created out of thin air, I correctly assumed that human resources wouldn't do anything for me if I complained. So I just tried to get through all the nonsense and started looking for another job on the side. 2 days later, I received a call from a senior vice president to whom the vice president from the elevator reported. Now, my boss also reported to another vice president. This vice president was a woman and not the same one from the elevator. And this vice president, in turn, reported to this senior vice president. The senior vice president asked me to attend a meeting the next day. I explained that I was happy to do so, but I would need to check with my boss first to ensure there were no scheduling conflicts. I also mentioned that I would appreciate it if the senior vice president could contact my boss to make her aware of the request. The senior vice president paused and then said, "No, that won't be necessary in this case," before hanging up. This didn't feel right. So I emailed my boss, informing her that the senior vice president had requested to meet with me the next day and that I wanted to make her aware of the meeting. She stormed into my office around 5:30 p.m., about an hour before I usually left, closed my door, and berated me for a good 20 minutes for speaking with the senior vice president. She was so loud that one of my department colleagues was about to call security just before my boss left my office. I knew my boss would be upset, but I didn't expect anything like this. The next day, I went to the meeting with the senior vice president. Present at the meeting were 3 vice presidents. The female vice president I had run into in the elevator, who had asked about the overruns, the female vice president to whom my boss reported, and a third female vice president who used to oversee the department in which I currently worked. The senior vice president proceeded to ask me about the overruns. I explained the issues as best as I could and also mentioned that I had prepared an email a few weeks ago about this. The vice president from the elevator stated that she never received that email on the cost overruns from me. I explained that the email wouldn't have come from me, but from my boss. The vice president asked why I wouldn't send it myself, and I replied that it wasn't my place to send emails to vice presidents. The senior vice president interrupted and asked, "What did you just say?" I reiterated my response, and the senior vice president began questioning me further. After about 15 minutes of explaining that I was not allowed to communicate with them per my boss's orders, the vice presidents and senior vice president were all visibly frustrated. I further explained that this policy was created by my boss and had been consistently enforced by her for the past month. They informed me that they would follow up on this matter, but that, in the meantime, they would obtain the emails regarding the overruns from my boss. This wasn't going to end well. I returned to my office that day, fully aware that I was in a difficult situation with no good options. I simply had to wait for the situation to unfold, and unfold it did. I came into work the next day, a Thursday, thinking that nothing had changed. It seemed like a normal oppressive day, and I was just waiting for the axe to fall. I worked through most of the morning, and then, right before lunch, I received an email. The email was from the senior vice president, with all the vice presidents copied on it, stating that my boss was taking some time off and would be back in a few days. During her absence, all requests and management decisions would be handled by the vice president to whom my boss reported. I wasn't quite sure what this meant, but with the weekend approaching, I was just glad that the stressful week was nearly over. The day passed uneventfully, and around 4 p.m., the vice president responsible for my department came to my office and informed me that, as of that day, my department and I no longer reported to my boss. I now reported directly to her. I asked what this meant for the department and my job. She replied that nothing would change, except that the department would be better served under this new reporting structure due to the increase in business activity since my hire, as well as the strategic internal leverage needed moving forward. She also explicitly stated that I was now free to communicate with any other vice presidents or senior vice presidents in the organization as I saw fit. She then apologized for the experience I had with my boss and told me she was unaware of my boss's directive forbidding me from communicating with her or other vice presidents or senior vice presidents. I took it all in, relieved that I would no longer have to endure being treated like a child by my boss. I then inquired about my boss's relationship with the other team members in my department and was told that she was forbidden from giving orders to them without my prior approval. I stayed with the company for about 3 years and had a great working relationship with the vice president, who is now my boss, as well as the other vice presidents and the senior vice president to whom they reported. I only left when I received a better offer in a different industry. Eventually, my former boss was counseled out over a 3-month period after Human Resources investigated her behavior. They interviewed me about the arbitrary rules regarding communication with vice presidents that she had enforced on me, as well as her shouting, writing me up, and disparaging me as a male. In a twist of fate, the write-up she issued against me was used as evidence that she had indeed implemented the no-contact policy solely with me. The fact that she documented it in my employee file proved the truth of my claims. Additionally, other issues related to cost overruns and financial reporting irregularities that she had hidden over the years further compounded the situation. I haven't seen her since, but if I ever do, I'd love to say, "Great seeing you again." I always tell people that you're the boss who taught me the importance of using email to further my career.